Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm just going to walk you through private and public sector unions across Canada. Now, my presentation's one opinion on unions. You're more apt to go out there and do your own search on government sites to look at unions to kind of get some more information to frame your decision around what's going on with unions in terms of their role and how funding's done. My goal with this presentation is not to pick on unions. My goal is to kind of look at solutions, kind of look at transparency when it comes to its union memberships, and the overall goals of unions to support both stabilizing government programs as well as helping move the economy forward. Now, a little bit about myself. I'm expertise in business finance for the better part of 25 years. I do videos just to illustrate issues, to get people discussing solutions. I'm not about partisan politics. I'm agnostic to any particular party. I'm more about solutions. Now, my agenda, I'll look at union dues. I'll look at the purpose of union dues. I'll talk about pensions. I'll get into some of the issues facing unions. I'll talk about lobbying, and I'll talk about oversight. Union dues are collected from your paycheck. They go into a fund. That fund then gets used for different engagements. Now, usually you're paid to a local chapter and some as well as a national chapter, depending on how your unions are assembled. So that's what you usually see as part of that. The union dues go into a fund. Okay. Now, lots been saying about transparency around union dues. Most unions, I would say all unions, provide financial statements. That should be disclosure at that. I know there's some issues in the past with people having access to that, but that they are by law supposed to produce financial statements, and those statements should be available to the union members. What does union dues go in general? Sometimes there's a strike fund with them. A lot of cases they go to education, they go through the arbitration and the contract negotiations, they go through local representation. If you get any sort of grievances, you're filing based on the contract. So that's what their purpose for. They act on behalf of you, for the company, for the benefits of your benefits and your salary. Now, let's talk about pensions. Okay. Now, this chart's from the Fraser Institute. So basically, public sector pensions in terms of the employees covered are about 87.8% are covered by some sort of public sector pension. They're workers. The private sector, only a quarter of that happens. Okay. So that being said, taking a step back quickly on pensions, there are so many other options with people in the private sector to contribute to pensions. We have RSPs, we have tax-free savings accounts. So it's a misnomer that just because you don't contribute in a small business, because it's a cost to them, it doesn't mean there's not options for people to save. So that being said, I'll get into more details issues around pension funding in the next few slides. Now, pension funding, you're seeing here, when you look at the public sector pensions across Canada, are defined benefit plans. So that means it's a guaranteed benefit. Those are very risky plans because they're guarantee a payout. A lot of cases in the private sector, most companies are starting getting away from defined benefit plans to go to defined contribution plans because of the risk and because of the possible funding. Part of that reason why you're seeing that is we're seeing lower market returns, especially when you're starting to look in secured areas like investment certificates, that we're only seeing 2-3% growth in those areas, that maybe in the 90s we were seeing 8% growth. So that's what you're seeing. The other thing is we're hitting through a proverbial significant issues in terms of underfunding. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner of this chart, you're seeing a $78 trillion underfunding issue in government pensions and private sector pensions. That's significantly. If all companies and governments were to stabilize their pensions, that would be $78 trillion that would have to be funded. So that's what you're seeing there, and that's significant issues. Now, what would that mean in general, quickly? Well, it would mean either a reduction in benefits or increase in the payouts in terms of the company and the government have to pay into the plan. So you have to keep that in mind. The middle part of it talks about that 92% of the Ontario defined benefit plans are underfunded. So in other words, the Ontario government would have to match those pensions because they're the creditor towards those plans, and they would have to back them. The top hand right corner talks about you retiree benefits because they put some funds into a trust fund. Now, because of the way healthcare costs are rising, there's considerable pressure on that fund to be sustainable. It's not the only issue that's happening in the private sector. There's a lot of pressures on funding because people are living longer. When they live longer and take better care, that means the fund is going to be under pressure, and that's what you're seeing there. Issues facing unions. Members are living longer. That's what I talked about, the benefits. So that's putting pressure on their retiree funds. Lower market returns of pension funds. Now, some pensions are a lot larger when you get into the Canadian Pension Investment Board, CPP, or you get into public sector pensions. They work directly to kind of look at ways to maximize returns by buying companies in terms of institutionalized shares. Even still then, they're not getting the return, so there's pressure on them based on withdrawing out of those pensions to keep those pensions healthy. There's less new members becoming into union membership, which means less into pension funds. Or governments are cutting back in terms of fiscal restraint, keeping the workers down through attrition in different ways. Here's the next big issue with unions that is a concern with everybody else. It's not to say unions shouldn't have a role, but they can significantly influence people's decision by different tactics. It's not to say that all unions do it. I'm not going to come out and openly say that, but they basically could encourage through leaflets, information as part of the election, to put their own position or spin. It's no different than when an advertisement comes in the mail from your local MPP or MLA or a councillor that's running for election. They're going to put a spin on policy. That's what the unions do to try to get you to vote a particular way. It's up to you when you look at lobbying to see, well, why is my money being spent that? And that's a key area to understand, because this is $6 million in general that's gone away from members that could have went to their own membership fund through skills and development, training, could have went through other aspects to help employees, could have went into strike funds. But you're seeing money maybe being used not in the most efficient and effective manner. Now, before we had a change in government, the Conservative Party of Canada brought in a transparency bill that made it clearly that you as union members were able to see more details around how your money is being spent. Well, that got scrapped, is being either getting scrapped or in the process of being scrapped by the Liberal government, because they don't want, they're taking pressure from the unions on this transparency. The far right hand side brings in a closure to this. When Justin Trudeau ran on the government, he ran on the oversight of transparent government. Transparent government means seeing information available so people can make informed decisions and understand how money's spent. Fast forward, by removing Bill 377, he's actually against transparency in terms of the way unions operate. He's also doing that with First Nations too in terms of financial disclosure. It's nice to talk about transparency. It really is critical to understand it, because in financial business, you want to know that your tax dollars or your union dues or any sort of money being spent is spent in an efficient and effective manner. If you do not get that type of level of granularity, then you've got concern that maybe waste will happen. Maybe there's something going on in paybacks and stuff like that. You want open government. And the verdict is on Justin Trudeau and his party, as well as provincial governments, municipals, and even unions in the First Nations, to become transparent how money is being spent. How that will evolve over time, I'm not sure what will happen. There will be pressure as we move forward, especially with the stability of the economy and people concerned about their retirements and overall social programs, to see what happens with a particular government in terms of having transparency. Now, this went a little bit further in this presentation on transparency, but it also brings oversight key, that if the top level isn't willing to provide oversight, what does that mean down to the lower levels? Now, I'm all about solution. I believe there should be transparency, and I believe unions in a lot of cases provide a certain level of transparency. But what I believe should happen is there should be much more open government, much more open transparency, so people understand how money is being spent. So they can question people and say, why are you spending my money that way? I didn't authorize you to do that way. We never had a proper discussion or debate. That's what it's about. I'm about solutions. I'm about trying to get transparency so people can discuss how we better move things forward as a country. Thank you.